Hey internets, so you know that really crazy conspiracy theory out there that a lot of big tech censorship was and is in fact happening in partnership with the state, often coming from the direct request of government organizations in order to censor speech that goes against what the regime wants people to see in order to ensure that the rubes vote in the way that they want them to vote? Yeah, that nutty conspiracy theory that we just totally did not know was happening until now. Because, well, as it turns out, to the surprise of absolutely no one who is familiar with this kind of dishonesty happening behind closed doors, that conspiracy theory has now, once again, been shown to be a fact. And this time we actually got something special. We got a full dump leak, including even specifically who was assigned to censor what and why it was being censored, and even specific links of what was being censored, all with the Department of Homeland Security's blessing. But what's also interesting, and what this video is going to be somewhat about as well, is the strange amount of radio silence and lack of major news coverage, as the mainstream media is heavily downplaying just how important this is. I mean, US government agencies blatantly violating the First Amendment and then trying to cover it up should be front page news basically everywhere if they were being honest. And yet, of course, journos in 2023 are not honest, and so it is not front page news. Only a few legacy sources bothered to report on this at all. So I'll be going into why this radio silence is the case as well. But first off, what exactly happened? What is this proof that we got? Well, it mostly stems from Representative Jim Jordan. Bombshell report on the censorship industrial complex. Hundreds of secret reports show how DHS Govs and CISA Gov, the GEC, State Department, and at Stanford and others worked together to censor Americans before the 2020 election, including true information, jokes, and opinions. And then below that, his general allegation is that the federal government, disinformation experts at universities, big tech, and others worked together through the Election Integrity Partnership to monitor and censor American speech. So yeah, that's some pretty darn strong allegations right there. And a lot of times people will claim to have evidence of major happenings like this and then fail to deliver, but in this case we actually do have some deliverance, which is a pretty big deal because this is two government agencies involved that absolutely shouldn't be doing something like this, and we know that they shouldn't be doing something like this because they actually seem to have lied about it a little while back, as the House Republicans decided to actually do something useful for a change, and held a hearing investigating the DHS and the CISA's censorship efforts. And in the midst of that investigation, the DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas earlier gave a testimony that the DHS was not involved in targeting Americans for censorship efforts. This is something that Jim Jordan suspected was nonsense, and pretty much everybody else along with him suspected it was nonsense during the hearing a few months back, and they actually gave him a chance to reconsider his testimony since it was completely inconsistent with the evidence that they already had back then, and that the DHS was absolutely involved in this kind of censorship efforts. Most likely, the testimony gave was a case of lying by equivocation. Now, what Mayorkas was most likely saying was in reference to whether or not these government agencies were directly censoring Americans, rather than using a middleman. Or in other words, whether or not these government agencies were directly censoring people, and then lying by saying they were not, when in reality they were just using big tech as a state proxy behind closed doors. He's basically saying, oh no, we didn't do the thing, we just made other people do the thing for us, while admitting the second part of the statement involving having others do their dirty work for them. It's a ridiculously dishonest and completely insane thing to say, and a very obvious lie when you understand everything going on behind it. And it really goes to show just how these agencies' corruption has reached clown world tier corruption levels ages ago. It's really amazing that the government can say lies like this and just feel no shame in doing it. So let's get back to Jim Jordan's claims. So how it would work is everybody involved would submit these misinformation reports, and they'd analyze the report and find some content across platforms, and by platforms they mean multiple big tech sites. I'll go over that a bit later. And then once they submit the report to big tech, they would come with a recommendation on how to censor, usually just either deleting the post outright, deleting the video, or shadow banning, or just completely deactivating their account in some cases. And they've released a pretty big report detailing all of this. It's an entire 100-page PDF file. It's titled The Weaponization of Disinformation, Pseudo-Experts, and Bureaucrats: How the Federal Government Partnered with Universities to Censor Americans' Political Speech. So yeah, academia is involved in this, journalists are involved in this, and big tech media is involved in this, all along with the federal government. Now, I'm not going to read this entire 100-page PDF on this video right now. I try to keep gamer rants under 20 minutes when I can, so definitely not doing that, but I'll give you a quick rundown. And I also do recommend anybody interested in the finer details take a look at it yourself. It is very long, but it is also very darning, and it provides a pretty good explanation behind a lot of the nonsense we've been seeing in the past 7 years or so. Because in all honesty, I'm pretty sure any rational person has had their suspicions over these last years. I mean, when you see the same person getting censored across multiple platforms at the exact same time for undisclosed subjective reasons, while various state agencies seem to be mysteriously milling about and moving around in the abyssal shadows. You really didn't have to be that much of a conspiracy theorist to suspect something was up. But anyways, this particular document is probably best summarized by this picture here that appears on the 4th page after their basic summary, which shows how the chain of command of this operation essentially functioned. So you had the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Administration, along with the Department of State, United States of America, GEC, or the DHS, with basically general federal government, and the chain of command then went to creating this election integrity partnership with Stanford Internet Observatory, with various agencies working along as a middleman, which then partnered with the state under the guise of being misinformation experts, trademark, then told Big Tech who and what to censor. The report also details how it was mostly conservatives being censored by this operation. And what's interesting is that the censorship not only went well beyond what the CISA is normally supposed to do, or what they claim that they're doing, which they generally claim that they're only doing this against foreign actors who are intentionally spreading misinformation in order to upset an American election. But of course, like corrupt government agencies pretty much always do, they stepped outside of those bounds and targeted ordinary American citizens. A few that particularly stand out in the who was being censored list include the Donald Trump, the James O'Keefe, and what's really funny is the Babylon Bee. So yes, in fact, United States government agencies were behind asking the Babylon Bee to be censored. For those of you who don't know, that is a satirical website. The Babylon Bee does not claim to be a factual website. They're very openly a satirical website, and the government was having them censored. I know it's kind of silly and pointless, but it's just another clown world moment that really stands out. No, stop making jokes that make us look bad. These jokes are very dangerous to our democracy. Oh, and the FBI and NSA were involved in this too, for just an additional cherry on top of this clown sundae. Now, what particularly stands out on this report that I do want to talk about is on page 81, which is the EIP's course of tactics, which explains that these social media platforms knew that the federal government was working with the EIP. And this is very big. This touches on something that I believe a lot of people are going to see this story and not immediately understand. Because if it was just a case of big tech voluntarily using the EIP as expert trademark advisors on what to censor, well, that would still be pretty stupid of them, and this would still be newsworthy. The fact that they knew that the state was behind it shows that there was in fact an element of a shakedown. It's very different when a private consultant says you should do something and a government agency says you should do something, because you know for a fact that you can get away with just ignoring a consultant's advice if you don't like it. But with these state agencies, it's a different story. If you don't comply, you know there are a ton of things they can do to twist your arm. They could bury your company in bogus investigations, frivolous tax audits, and other superfluous activations of rules that exist pretty much purely for the sake of anarcho-tyranny, designed to ensure that people with this kind of power can screw you at their discretion. This is an important thing that a lot of people do not immediately recognize, because the state operates on completely different rules of aggression. Them asking you for a so-called favor is not the same thing as a private company asking for something like this. For example, imagine if a random person walked up to you and asked if they could see your driver's license or some other identification card. Regardless of whether or not you would show it to them, you know that this random person doesn't really have any power over you. You know it is entirely up to you whether or not to show them. You know that there really isn't anything in the realms of legality that said person can do to make you show ID. Now imagine the same scenario, but it's a cop asking you for ID. Technically, under many circumstances and depending where you live, you don't always have to produce identification when a cop asks you to. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Be sure to check your local laws on that. But regardless, there are tons of things a cop can do to you to screw you over and escalate the situation until you comply. For instance, the cop can claim that he suspects you of some frivolous wrongdoing and then bring you in for questioning, and there are tons of tools at his disposal to harass you. It's the same thing when the government tells a tech company that deals in social media what to censor. Everyone who owns a business knows that even if there's no law demanding they immediately comply with such state requests, guess what? That doesn't matter, because there are still hundreds of other ways the state can harass someone for non-compliance. Just this fact alone immediately automatically puts an element of coercion into this type of censorship. And so when members of the mainstream media act like they don't understand this, they are either really, really stupid, or more likely, they are lying to you. Now, in addition to this report, what makes this especially alarming is that they actually published the main evidence of the JIRA tickets they found. From what I'm looking at here, this seems to be a general data dump. Jim Jordan linked a Google spreadsheet document that shows all of the data that they were using to go over what was censored. And I went through a lot of the JIRA tickets, and admittedly, a lot of the stuff that they were censoring are inconsequential stuff that doesn't really matter, and silly boomer posts over election mishandling and whatnot, and a lot of it probably was bogus. But again, that doesn't matter because the state doesn't have the right to be censoring this kind of stuff. The DHS, CISA, the FBI should all not even be involved in this at all. Period. It is outside of their scope, and it is, in my opinion, a blatant violation of the First Amendment, and so this is therefore wrong just on principle alone. But unfortunately, it's actually much worse than that, because not everything in here is bogus. For instance, they were censoring claims of Antifa prepping for violence, despite the fact that that was absolutely true. They were. And to add some extra spice onto this stupidity, they even prioritized this not misinformation as high priority. And for those of you who are new to my channel and don't know, I actually live nearby Portland, Oregon. I've seen them do this stuff in person, not just on TV. So this isn't just a case of them only censoring things in relation to the vaccine or the election handling. They were perfectly happy with taking things far beyond that. But anyways, I think you all get the gist of what happened. So next I want to go over something that is almost just as interesting as this censorship scandal, which is, again, as I mentioned at the start of this video, the major radio silence we're seeing from a lot of members of the mainstream media. Now, some of them did report on this. For instance, Fox News reported on it, New York Post reported on it, and The Hill reported on it. But again, state agencies violating the First Amendment and then lying about it is a really big deal. It's a very big story. It should have been everywhere. And yet there were a few major ones where I couldn't find barely a peep. Just flat out didn't report on this at all, at least not what I could find. Another big one was CNN. Not even a peep. Zero coverage. Or how about ABC? Again, nothing. This is a blatant example of downplaying a story and lying by omission. The closest thing I could find was this article on MSNBC titled "Jordan's War on Facts Continues with Attacks on Disinfo Experts" from June 29th, which came out just after the interim staff report, where they released this simplified 37-page version back in June 26, 2023. Where MSNBC is basically arguing that the censorship is a good thing, because the experts' trademark say so, where the journo presents arguments that completely misunderstand why it is wrong when the government does this kind of thing, even dishonestly calling Twitter files a conspiracy theory. In other words, it's not happening, and it is happening, and it's a good thing. Now, is MSNBC going to update their statement and give us a correction now that Jim Jordan has released the JIRA tickets? Of course not. Why would they correct that? You see, a big problem with a lot of modern-day corporate journos is that they've figured out it's better to just pretend that them being proven wrong didn't happen. They figured out that it's better for them to just not issue any kind of corrections at all. The conclusions we can draw from this are actually pretty straightforward. These people do not actually believe in free speech at all. They do not actually believe in the First Amendment. They just pretend to for the sake of optics. These people want a world where what you are allowed to say, see, and think are all dictated by the managerial class and backed up by aggressive policy from the non-productive class of the state. And that's why they don't really report on it when something like this happens. Because they know that it's happening, they are actually a part of it happening, and they are in on its happening, and they like that it's happening. Whether or not it's ethical or legal stopped mattering to these people a long time ago. Anyway, that's all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, share, subscribe, tip me on Ko-Fi, or leave a comment for the algorithm. Till next time.